She spent 5 years building a man's empire with her bare hands, and he paid her back by walking through her front door with another woman on his arm. Tonight, Charlotte Bennett finally understood what she had been too in love to see. Roman DeLuca never saw a wife standing across from him. He saw a resource he had already finished using. But what Roman didn't know, what would cost him everything, was that someone else had been watching Charlotte for years. Waiting. Building something in silence. And the moment Roman threw her away, that someone picked her up. If you've ever loved someone who only took, stay until the very end of this story. Hit that like button and drop your city in the comments. I want to see how far this story travels. The elevator doors opened at exactly 7 minutes past 7, and Charlotte Bennett was still standing at the kitchen island with a dish towel folded over her left forearm, like a woman who had convinced herself that dinner could still mean something. The penthouse smelled like garlic butter and expensive candles, and the kind of hope that already knew it was dying. 43rd floor, downtown Chicago, floor-to-ceiling glass on 3 sides. The city spread below like scattered diamonds, beautiful, indifferent, merciless in the way that cities always are when they witness private humiliation. Charlotte had been cooking since 3 in the afternoon. That wasn't something she planned to admit to anyone, least of all herself. But the evidence was there. The cutting board still faintly stained with rosemary oil, the second wine glass she had already washed and dried twice because her hands needed something to do while she waited. She had set the table with the good silverware, the heavy kind with the engraved handles Roman's mother had given them 2 Christmases ago, back when Roman's mother still pretended to like her. She had pressed the tablecloth with an actual iron, which she hadn't done since the first year of their marriage when she was still trying to prove something. The dark crimson dress she wore had been sitting in the back of her closet for 6 months. Tags still attached until this morning. She had bought it on an afternoon when she felt, briefly and without explanation, like the woman she used to be. Then the feeling passed and the dress stayed in its bag, and Charlotte went back to wearing the soft, formless things that required no opinion of herself. But tonight she had worn it. She had stood in the bathroom mirror for 11 minutes, not admiring herself. That wasn't the right word for what she was doing. She was conducting an inspection, the kind she had learned to run on herself the way a property manager surveys a building after a long winter, cataloging damage with detached clinical efficiency. The softness around her hips that hadn't been there in year 1. The hollowness beneath her eyes that no amount of concealer fully erased anymore. The particular quality of her jaw, slightly tensed even in repose, like a woman braced for impact she had learned to anticipate but not avoid. She had looked at herself for 11 minutes, and then she had gone out and lit the candles. The elevator chimed. Charlotte set down the dish towel, smoothed the front of her dress with one hand, pulled her shoulders back the way Victoria was always telling her to do. "You walk like you're apologizing for being in the room, Charlie. Stop it," and turned toward the entrance with a smile already constructed and waiting. Roman DeLuca walked in, and behind him, without pause, without hesitation, without a single acknowledgement that this was anything other than completely ordinary, walked Evelyn Sinclair. Charlotte's smile stayed on her face through pure muscular memory, while everything behind it went completely cold. She knew Evelyn Sinclair the way all wives eventually know the woman who doesn't respect their marriage. Not from confrontation, not from confession, but from the particular frequency of a name mentioned one too many times. Evelyn organized the Hartwell fundraiser. Evelyn connected us to the Montrose family. Evelyn handled the Donovan situation, said casually, said without eye contact, said in the tone men use when they are telling you something true while making sure you can't prove it. Evelyn was blonde in the architectural way, the kind of blonde that required quarterly maintenance and communicated, without apology, that she considered her appearance a professional tool. She wore a gray dress that cost more than Charlotte's car payment. She walked the way women walk when they have decided that every room belongs to them until someone physically removes them from it. She didn't look at Charlotte with hostility. That would have been easier. She looked at Charlotte with the mild, passing interest of someone glancing at furniture Roman had not called ahead. That detail embedded itself in Charlotte's chest like a splinter. Small, precise, deep enough to require effort to remove. 5 years of marriage. He had not called to say, "Bring an extra glass. Someone's joining us." He had not texted from the car. He had simply arrived, with this woman, into the dinner Charlotte had spent 4 hours preparing and he was wearing the charcoal suit she had taken to the dry cleaner 2 weeks ago, and he looked, in some way she couldn't immediately name, relieved. That was the word that would haunt her later, in the dark, in the weeks that followed. Not guilty, not conflicted, not even indifferent. Relieved. Like a man who had made a decision he'd been sitting on for months and had finally, tonight, chosen to act on it. Roman. Her voice came out level. She was proud of that, in the way you are proud of small, stupid things when large, catastrophic things are happening. I didn't know we had company. Roman looked at the table. His eyes moved across it. The candles, the pressed tablecloth, the good silverware, the wine breathing on the counter, and something crossed his face that she couldn't read in time before it was gone. Charlotte. He said her name the way you say the name of a place you used to live. We need to talk. The we included Evelyn. Charlotte understood that immediately, even though she didn't want to. The food's almost ready, Charlotte said. Not because she believed dinner was still happening, because her body needed a response, and that was the one it produced. If you want to sit down, I want a divorce. He said it the way you announce a flight departure. Calm, final, already past the point of discussion. The room did not change. The candles continued burning. The wine continued breathing. The city lights below continued their indifferent glittering. Everything held its shape except Charlotte, who felt something move through her chest that had no good name. Not pain exactly, not shock exactly, though it wore both their faces. More like the sensation of a floor that has been quietly rotting, finally giving way beneath a step you've taken 1,000 times before. She had known. She had known the way you know a thing you have refused to look at directly for so long that its outline has become part of the wallpaper. The separate schedules. The phone set face down on every table. The way he answered her questions with the minimum number of words required to technically constitute a response. The last time he had touched her with anything resembling intention, she could place it in a season, roughly, but not a month. That was its own kind of answer. She had known. But knowing and hearing are two different rooms entirely. Evelyn's gaze moved over Charlotte once. Not meanly, exactly, or rather with a kind of meanness so practiced and polished that it passed itself off as neutrality. Her eyes tracked from Charlotte's face down to the crimson dress, and then back up. And then she said lightly, as if commenting on the weather, "You really stopped taking care of yourself." 5 words. Charlotte turned to Roman. She was not sure afterward what she had expected. Not a defense, maybe. She was past expecting Roman to defend her in front of other people. But something. The small social reflex of a man who had once, in some version of reality, loved this woman. A quiet "that's enough," a shift of his body, a look that communicated, "I'll handle this, not you." Roman said nothing. He looked slightly to the left of Charlotte's face, with the expression of a man waiting for an unpleasant administrative process to complete itself. And in that silence, in the exact shape of that silence, in its precise texture and weight, Charlotte finally understood something she had been circling for years. Not just that the marriage was over. That had been true for long enough that its ending was almost a formality. What she understood, standing in the dinner she had cooked and the dress she had finally worn and the apartment that had never felt like home because she had never been allowed to make it one, was that Roman DeLuca had not fallen out of love with her. He had simply never factored her in. She had been a function, a capable, useful, tireless function. The woman who stabilized his empire when it was bleeding, who networked his credibility into existence, who absorbed his moods and managed his reputation and quietly dismantled her own life to shore up the foundation of his. She had been so competent at loving him that he had never once had to ask himself whether he loved her back. The elevator doors closed behind them at 8:14. Charlotte did not move. She stood in the kitchen with the dish towel still folded over her forearm and listened to the silence of the penthouse expand around her. The candles were starting to gutter. The wine was over-breathing. The food on the stove had passed the point where it was still salvageable and crossed into something that just needed to be turned off. She turned off the stove. She blew out the candles one by one, working her way around the table systematically, the way you check off a list. She did not cry. The crying would come later, over the following days, in the shower mostly, in the compressed private minutes where it felt safe enough to fall apart. But right now she was still running on the weird, clean adrenaline of someone whose worst expectation has finally been confirmed. And there is, in that moment, a brief, terrible relief in having the uncertainty end. She carried the wine bottle to the kitchen counter and poured a glass she didn't drink. She sat on the couch in the darkened penthouse and looked at the city below. Roman city, technically. Or the city that believed it belonged to him, which was close enough to the same thing. 43 floors beneath her, those streets were cross-hatched with the networks he had built, the debts owed, the agreements enforced, the rivals absorbed or eliminated. Roman DeLuca had not been born powerful. He had constructed his power with the ruthless patience of a man who grew up watching powerful men and reverse-engineered their confidence before he ever had anything to back it up with. She had helped him do it. That was the part that kept circling back. Charlotte Bennett, before Roman, before the marriage, before she had gradually and so thoroughly mistaken sacrifice for devotion that she couldn't distinguish between the two anymore, had been someone. Not in the soft, charitable way people use that phrase to comfort women who have lost themselves. Actually, someone. Her event company, Bennett Signature Events, had been one of the 3 fastest-growing luxury firms in Chicago at the point she dissolved it. She had started it at 26 with a single business credit card and a contact list she'd built entirely through force of personality. By 29, she was running private fundraisers for the governor's circles. By 30, she had clients who didn't put her name anywhere near their public life, but called her before they called their lawyers when something needed handling quietly and competently. She had been sharp. She had been certain of herself in a way that didn't require the room to confirm it. She had walked into negotiations with men twice her age and net worth and left with better terms than they intended to give because she had done the work to know exactly where the leverage was before she walked in. Then Roman's empire had hit its first structural crisis. The Marchetti family had called in 3 favors simultaneously. 2 of Roman's financial pipelines had been exposed to federal scrutiny and needed to be shuttered before they became traceable. A business partner had stolen a significant portion of their operating capital and vanished with enough information to be genuinely dangerous. Roman had shown up at a charity gala Charlotte was running, the St. Aldine Hospital benefit, which she had organized nearly alone, and she had watched him move through that room and understood, with the clear-eyed instinct of someone who knew how rooms worked, that he was managing a crisis with roughly 60% of his real attention and doing it badly. She had pulled him aside at 9:45 behind the catering wing and said, "Tell me what's wrong, all of it. Don't manage me," he had told her. And Charlotte Bennett had looked at the problem and then looked at the resources she had and then made a series of decisions that she had understood, even as she made them, were going to cost her. She pulled investment from her company to stabilize his cash flow during the federal scrutiny period. She restructured 2 charity events to serve as legitimate financial fronts. Not in ways she was proud of, but in ways that worked and that kept his operation from collapsing long enough to regroup. She introduced him to her best clients, the ones who existed in the margins between legitimate wealth and power that needed to stay quiet. And she did it using the credibility she had spent years building. Her reputation became his calling card. Over the following 18 months, Roman DeLuca's empire stabilized, expanded, and then became something formidable. And Bennett's signature events quietly dissolved because Charlotte no longer had the bandwidth or the client base to sustain it. She had told herself it was a season, that she was building something with Roman that would eventually include her own ambitions again, that they were partners, real partners, and that her sacrifice was the seed of something they would both harvest. She had told herself a great many things. The phone on the cushion beside her buzzed. She had forgotten it was there. She looked at the screen expecting Victoria. Victoria, who had a supernatural ability to sense when Charlotte needed someone and consistently showed up 11 minutes too late or 5 hours early, depending on the crisis. But the number on the screen was one she didn't recognize. No name, no area code she placed immediately. She stared at it for a long moment. Then she opened the message. "I saw him leave. Are you all right?" Charlotte sat with the phone in her hand and the dark city below her and the extinguished candles on the table. She had pressed herself. She read the message twice, then a third time. Her thumb hovered over the screen. She did not respond. She put the phone face down on the cushion and pulled her knees up to her chest inside the crimson dress she was still wearing, and she looked at the dark shapes of skyscrapers cutting the sky outside. And she allowed herself, finally, 1 minute of complete silence where she wasn't managing anything at all. Just one. Then she got up, went to the kitchen, wrapped the uneaten food in foil with the methodical precision of someone who needed their hands to be doing something useful, poured the wine down the sink, and began mentally drafting the list of every single thing in this apartment that had her name on it. Victoria Hayes arrived the following evening carrying 2 bags of Thai food and the specific energy of a woman who had been sitting on approximately 47 things she wanted to say for at least 24 hours and was barely containing the pressure of them. She was tall, angular, and deeply brown-skinned with the kind of cheekbones that photographers loved, and the kind of mouth that had ended friendships and started loyalty wars in equal measure. She had known Charlotte since their second year at Northwestern, where they had met during an academic decathlon that Charlotte won, and Victoria had protested the scoring of loudly in front of everyone. They had been inseparable since the following Tuesday. Victoria walked through the penthouse door Charlotte buzzed open without speaking, surveyed the space with the clinical sweep of a woman cataloging the scene of a crime, set the food on the counter, and turned around. "Where is he?" "Gone," Charlotte said. "And don't." "Don't what?" "Whatever you're about to propose." "I was going to propose eating food," Victoria said, opening the first bag with unnecessary force. "And then, separately, I was going to propose putting his Porsche in the Chicago River, but I was going to eat first." "Victoria, I'm serious about the food part." Charlotte sat at the kitchen island. Victoria moved around the counter like she owned it. She had always moved through Charlotte's spaces with that quality, like her presence in them was a foregone conclusion, and began opening containers and setting them out with the brisk, efficient motions of someone who understood that feeding people was a form of intervention. "Tell me," Victoria said, without looking up. Charlotte told her, not the version she would tell a therapist or a lawyer or a well-meaning acquaintance who would respond with, "I'm so sorry," and then slowly distance themselves from the discomfort of proximity to a failing marriage. The real version. She told Victoria about the elevator doors and the gray dress and the 5 words Evelyn Sinclair had offered like a small clean knife. She told her about Roman's silence, about the dish towel, about blowing out the candles one by one. Victoria listened without interrupting, which was unusual enough to be its own kind of testimony to how seriously she was taking it. When Charlotte finished, Victoria put down her fork. "He didn't suddenly stop loving you," she said. Her voice had gone quiet in the specific way it did when she was saying something she had been thinking through for a long time. "He stopped pretending he respected you. Those are different things. The first one would be sad. The second one is something else." Charlotte looked at the food she hadn't touched. "I know. You've known for longer than last night. I know that too." "Charlie." Victoria waited until Charlotte looked at her. "What do you need right now? Not eventually. Right now." Charlotte thought about it for a moment. "I need to figure out what I still have," she said finally. "What's mine, what I can actually use?" Victoria nodded slowly. "Okay, that's something we can work with." It was close to midnight when Charlotte picked up her phone and looked again at the message from the unknown number. She had thought about it, off and on throughout the day. Not because it was dramatic or mysterious, the message itself was plain enough, but because of the precision of it. "I saw him leave. Not heard about what happened, or are you doing okay, or the various forms of secondhand concern that traveled through social networks before they reached the people they were ostensibly about." This was direct, present. The phrasing of someone who had been in proximity to the building when Roman left. Someone who had specific information about a specific moment. Someone who had been paying attention. She typed, "Who is this?" The reply came in under 40 seconds. "Sebastian Kane. We met at the Alderton Foundation Gala 4 years ago. You were running the event." Charlotte sat with the name for a moment. Then it came back, not sharply, but the way things you filed away in a quiet mental drawer come back when you finally pull it open. The Alderton Gala had been one of the last major events she ran before the company dissolved. She had been managing 12 moving parts simultaneously that night, and still, at some point near the end, she had ended up in a conversation with a man who worked, quietly, somewhere in the margins of the same world Roman occupied. She remembered him because he had been the opposite of everything she expected in that room. No performance, no competitive name-dropping. He had asked her one question about how she structured the event logistics, and then actually listened to the answer for 4 full minutes while the room spun with people who were only waiting for their turn to speak. He had shaken her hand at the end of the evening and said her company was the best-run operation in the room, and he had said it like a fact rather than a compliment. She had not thought of him again. "How did you get this number?" she typed. Another short pause. Then, "Roman's contact list. From 3 years ago. I kept it. That's a strange thing to keep. I keep things that matter." Charlotte stared at the screen. Outside the window, Chicago was doing what Chicago did at midnight. Alive in the specific restless way of a city that has never fully decided whether it's working or celebrating or preparing for something. "Why are you reaching out?" she typed. The pause before his response was longer this time, long enough that she thought he might have reconsidered. Then, "Because I watched you run that room for 6 hours, and you were the most capable person in it. And because the man you married spent 4 years taking credit for work that was yours. And because I thought someone should say that out loud." Charlotte read the message. Then she set the phone down on the counter and looked at nothing for a long time. She did not respond that night, but she saved the number. And 3 weeks later, sitting in a coffee shop 2 blocks from the attorney's office where she had just signed the first set of divorce documents, watching the snow beginning to come down on Michigan Avenue with the slow, indifferent patience of a Chicago November, she pulled up the contact and typed, "He's asking for a settlement that includes the contacts I built before the marriage. The network. Like it belongs to him." She hadn't planned to send it to him. It had simply been where her hands went. The response came in 4 minutes. "Of course he is. He's been treating your work as his asset for 4 years. He's just making it official now. My attorney says I have limited options. Your attorney is working with the wrong frame. The contacts aren't property. They're relationships. And relationships follow the person who built them, not the person who borrowed them. Get a different attorney." Charlotte looked at the message, then out the window at the snow. "I haven't practiced running anything in 3 years." "I know. You're also the woman who built a 7-figure business from a credit card and a contact list. 3 years of bad circumstances don't erase that. It's still in you. You've just been living somewhere that didn't want you to use it." She sat with that for a moment. Outside, a cab pulled to the curb, and a woman in a long wool coat stepped out carrying too many things, managing all of them with the calm, practiced efficiency of someone long accustomed to carrying more than she was supposed to. Charlotte watched her disappear through a door. "What do you want from this?" she typed, "from reaching out?" The pause was the longest yet. She counted to 30 before the response appeared. "Nothing you're not willing to give." I watched someone spend years being useful to a man who never once asked what she actually wanted. I'm not interested in being another version of that. Charlotte read it twice. Then she put the phone in her bag, finished her coffee, put on her coat, and walked out into the snow with the first clear thought she'd had in months forming somewhere behind her sternum, like a coal beginning to find heat. She still had the contacts. She still had the instincts. She still had 4 years of knowledge about how Roman DeLuca's empire actually functioned, its mechanics, its dependencies, its structural vulnerabilities, that he had never thought to protect himself from because it had never occurred to him that she would ever stop choosing him. And somewhere in this city, a man she had spoken to once, 4 years ago, had kept her number in a drawer labeled "Things That Matter." The elevator in her divorce attorney's building was still descending when Charlotte Bennett made a quiet, unhurried decision that would take Roman DeLuca the better part of a year to fully understand the consequences of. She was going to rebuild, not frantically, not out of bitterness. Bitterness was a fire that consumed the person carrying it before it reached its target, and she had watched enough of Roman's rivals destroy themselves that way to know the pattern. She was going to rebuild the way she had built the first time, with patience, with precision, with the specific, ruthless calm of a woman who had done the math and already knew the answer before she walked into the room. And this time, nobody was going to make her smaller to make room for themselves. She stepped out of the elevator into the snow and reached for her phone. She opened Sebastian Kane's contact. She typed, "I want to meet." His response came before she had fully lowered her hand. "Tell me when." Weeks later, when Charlotte finally walked into the quiet whiskey lounge where Sebastian had suggested they meet, a place with no sign on the door and no noise from the street, She had no way of knowing that Roman DeLuca had spent the previous 48 hours trying to locate a specific financial pipeline that had, without explanation, gone completely silent. She didn't know yet what Sebastian Kane actually was in this city. She didn't know yet what he was capable of. But the moment she stepped through that door and saw him already seated, watching the room with the unhurried patience of a man who had nowhere more important to be, she understood one thing with immediate clarity. This was not a man performing power. This was a man who had already decided, a long time ago, that he would never need to. The whiskey lounge had no name on the door. That was the first thing Charlotte noticed. Not the address Sebastian had texted her, not the unmarked black door set back from the alley off Wabash, not even the fact that she had walked past it twice before a man in a dark coat materialized from a position she hadn't registered and said, quietly, "Ms. Bennett," and held the door open without further explanation. No name on the door. In Roman's world, everything had a name. Everything was branded, marked, announced. Roman DeLuca operated through visible dominance. The right table at the right restaurant, the car that cost too much to be subtle, the way his men stood slightly too close to other men in rooms to communicate hierarchy without speaking it. His power was performed, continuously, exhaustingly. Like a man who understood, on some level he would never consciously admit, that the moment he stopped performing it, people would stop believing in it. This place had no name on the door. Inside, the light was low and amber, the kind that came from sources you couldn't immediately locate. The room was not large. Maybe 12 tables, half of them occupied by people who did not look up when she entered. Not from rudeness, she sensed, but from the particular trained discretion of people who understood that not seeing things was sometimes a professional courtesy. Dark wood paneling, the smell of aged oak and good whiskey, and something faintly herbal she couldn't identify. Sebastian Kane was already seated. He was at a corner table with his back to the wall, the specific table choice of someone who had learned, at some point, and probably the hard way, to always know where the exits were and who was between him and them. He was not what she would have called conventionally imposing. He wasn't Roman's size. Roman had the physical presence of a man who had spent years ensuring that other men were always at least slightly aware of his body in the room. Sebastian was leaner, not slight. There was nothing slight about him, but the kind of built that suggested efficiency rather than intimidation. Dark jacket, open collar, no tie. The kind of clothes that cost enough to be invisible. He stood when she approached. Not performatively. He simply stood, pulled out the chair across from him, and waited until she sat before sitting again himself. It was such a straightforward piece of basic courtesy that Charlotte felt something contract in her chest at it, which told her more about the last 5 years than she wanted to examine right now. "You found it," he said. "Barely." She settled her coat over the back of the chair. "There's no sign." "I know." A pause. "I like it that way." The server appeared, materialized really, with the same quality as the man outside, present without announcement, and Sebastian glanced at Charlotte with a brief questioning look. "Whiskey," she said. "Whatever you'd recommend." Sebastian named something to the server that she didn't catch, and the server disappeared again. Charlotte looked at him across the table. 4 years was long enough to blur details, sharpen impressions. She remembered the quality of his attention more than the specifics of his face. And now, sitting across from him, she understood why. His face was the kind that gave you nothing unless he decided to give it. Not cold, not blank. Carefully neutral in the way of someone who had learned that expressions were information, and information was currency, and currency should not be spent carelessly. But his eyes were paying attention in a way that she felt as physical pressure, low and steady. "You said get a different attorney," Charlotte said. No preamble. She had decided on the cab ride over that she was done with preamble. Preamble was something she had learned in the years of managing Roman's moods, from the careful warm-up, the strategic approach, making sure the path was smooth before you walked on it. She was done warming up paths for other people. "I did. Her name is Dana Fisk. You probably know her." Something moved at the corner of his mouth. Not quite a smile. Recognition, maybe. "Dana Fisk is excellent. She thinks I have a strong case for recovering the business assets Roman absorbed. The contacts, the vendor relationships, the event infrastructure I built before the marriage." Charlotte paused. "She also thinks Roman is going to make it ugly before he makes it settled. He will, Sebastian said. He doesn't know how to lose quietly. He never learned. Quiet losses don't build reputation in the world he operates in. What world do you operate in? The question came out more direct than she intended, but she left it there because she was also done softening questions that needed hard answers. Sebastian looked at her for a moment. Adjacent, he said, to Roman's world, not inside it. That's not an answer. It's a partial answer. He tilted his head slightly. What do you already know? That you have money. That you move in rooms that require a certain kind of credibility to enter. That Roman knew of you. But I never heard your name attached to a specific operation, which in that world either means you're peripheral or you're careful. And which do you think it is? Charlotte studied him. You have a corner table with sight lines to both exits in a room with no sign on the door and a man outside who knows my name without being introduced to me. You're not peripheral. Sebastian picked up his glass. No, he agreed. I'm not. The whiskey arrived. Charlotte wrapped her hand around the glass and felt the cold of it, the weight. She took a sip and felt it move through her chest like something being cleaned out. I need to understand something, she said, before this goes any further. You reached out to me the night Roman left. You kept my number for 4 years. You told me things about my own situation with a level of specificity that required you to have been paying attention. She set the glass down. I'm not interested in walking into another room where someone has an agenda they haven't told me about. Sebastian was quiet for a moment. Then he said, 4 years ago you ran an event that had 3 separate crises behind the scenes that the guests never knew about. A catering fire in the service kitchen. A political donor who showed up intoxicated and aggressive and needed to be removed without creating a scene, and a scheduling conflict with the venue that could have ended the event at 8 p.m. You handled all 3 simultaneously, and the guests experienced a flawless evening. He paused. I was watching because I had my own interest in one of the donors at that event, but I kept watching because of you. Because the quality of attention you brought to a room under that kind of pressure was unusual. Charlotte said nothing. I kept your number, he continued, because I keep track of people who are genuinely exceptional at what they do, not as assets, not as contacts to use, because it is rare, and I have learned over time not to lose track of rare things. And the night Roman left, I was in the building. A beat. I have a standing arrangement with a tenant on the 32nd floor. I saw Roman's car, and then I saw him leave with Evelyn Sinclair, and I knew, I had known for some time, frankly, what that meant. I didn't know if you'd respond, but I thought someone should reach out who wasn't going to spend the first 45 seconds of the conversation making it about themselves. Charlotte absorbed this. You knew about Evelyn. I knew about Evelyn for approximately 8 months, his voice was even. It wasn't my place to tell you. You weren't someone I had a relationship with. I had a number and a memory. That's a convenient distinction. It's an honest one. He didn't flinch from it. I'm not going to tell you I handled it perfectly. I'm telling you what was true. The thing that Charlotte had spent 5 years slowly losing. The instinct, the read of a room, the specific antenna that told her when someone was performing versus when someone was simply being a person in front of her, was still there. Dormant, maybe. Rusty, certainly, but operational. And it was telling her, with the low, steady certainty of something running on bedrock, that Sebastian Kane was not performing. That did not mean she trusted him. Trust was not something she intended to hand out again like it was free. But it meant she was willing to continue the conversation. Tell me what you actually do, she said. Not adjacent, specifically. Sebastian looked at her for a long moment. Then he told her. It took the better part of an hour, interrupted twice by whiskey refills she barely noticed happening. He laid it out without embellishment and without the rehearsed quality of a prepared pitch. The real estate holdings that served as legitimate infrastructure, the private equity arrangements that provided distance from anything traceable, the influence networks built over 15 years through careful investment in people rather than operations. He was not a crime boss in the way Roman was a crime boss. He did not run soldiers, did not enforce through violence, did not have the kind of street-level machinery that Roman's empire required. What he had was leverage. Quiet, structural, systemic leverage, the kind that didn't announce itself until it was already operating. You're the reason two of Roman's financial pipelines went quiet during the federal scrutiny period, Charlotte said. Not a question. Sebastian didn't answer immediately. I identified a mutual benefit in certain outcomes, he said finally. At the time, it served my interests for Roman's operation to survive that period. And now? The pause before his answer was the longest of the evening. Now, he said, my interests have shifted. Charlotte looked at him across the amber light. Because of me, she said flatly. Because of what he did to you, partly. And because I've watched Roman DeLuca take credit for other people's architecture for long enough that I've stopped finding it useful to pretend that empire deserves the foundation it's sitting on. Charlotte wrapped both hands around her glass and looked at the table for a moment. I'm not here for revenge, she said. The word felt important to say out loud, to herself as much as him. I've thought about it. It's a seductive idea. But I watched Roman spend 10 years turning grievances into fuel, and I know what that does to a person. It hollows you out, and you don't notice until you're already empty. I know, Sebastian said. I'm not offering you revenge. Then what are you offering? He leaned forward slightly. I'm offering you introduction back into every room you were quietly removed from. I'm offering you a business infrastructure that can support a relaunch at the level you were operating before without requiring you to start from zero. I'm offering you access to the capital and contacts to rebuild Bennett's signature events into something larger than it was. A pause. And I'm offering you a partnership with someone who has no interest in making himself bigger by making you smaller. Charlotte looked at him steadily. That's a significant offer. It is. What do you get from it? Sebastian sat back. I get to work alongside someone competent in rooms that I could use that competency in. I get access to the social infrastructure you understand better than anyone I've met. The legitimate world, the charity circuits, the political adjacent spaces that require someone who can move in them without it looking like what it is. And I get... He stopped. Say it, Charlotte said. I get to spend time with the most interesting person I've met in a very long time. He said it without performance. Flatly, like stating the square footage of a room. I'm aware that sounds like a line. I don't know how to make it not sound like one, but it's what's true. Charlotte was quiet. She thought about Victoria, who had said last week over the phone, Charlie, at some point you have to stop treating every person who's interested in you like they're about to reveal the hidden invoice. She thought about the attorney's office and the divorce documents and the settlement demand that included her contact network like it was Roman's property to keep. She thought about standing in front of that mirror in the crimson dress, cataloging damage. I need time to think about it, she said. Take it. And I need one thing to be clear from the beginning. Tell me. I'm not rebuilding so that I have something new to lose. I'm rebuilding because it's mine and I want it back. If at any point that conflicts with what you want from this, I need to know. Sebastian looked at her for a long moment. It won't, he said. She searched his face. The antenna was still running, still reading, still telling her the same thing it had been telling her since she walked through the unmarked door. Okay, she said. I'll think about it. She thought about it for 6 days. On the 7th day, she called Dana Fisk and got the news that Roman's legal team had filed a countermotion that was, in Dana's words, aggressive, strategic, and clearly intended to run up your costs and your patience simultaneously. Roman was contesting not just the contact network, but the value of her contributions to his business infrastructure during the marriage, arguing that the work she had performed was equivalent to a salaried position, for which she had received compensation in the form of the lifestyle the marriage provided, and therefore constituted no claim to equity. Charlotte sat with the phone against her ear and listened to Dana explain this. Then she said, What do we need to counter it? Documented evidence of the business value of your specific contributions separate from general marital support. Financial records showing the capital you transferred from Bennett's signature events to his operations. Communication records showing your strategic role, not just a supportive spouse role. I have all of that, Charlotte said. I kept everything. Dana paused. You kept records? I kept everything, Charlotte said again. I kept it because I built it, and I knew what it was worth. There was a brief silence on Dana's end that contained, Charlotte thought, a certain quality of professional surprise. Send me everything you have, Dana said. Every document, every email, every transfer record. Charlotte spent that evening at her new apartment, a two-bedroom in River North, clean and spare, completely hers. Pulling files she had kept on an external hard drive she had never told Roman existed. She had backed them up obsessively during the last 2 years of the marriage, not because she was planning to leave, but because she had a deep instinct about documentation that predated Roman and had survived him. She sent everything to Dana at 11:58 that night. Then she called Sebastian. He picked up on the second ring. "I'm in," she said. "The partnership. I want to start with the Meridian Foundation Gala in 6 weeks. I know the event director. I think I can get a meeting if I go in with the right backing." A pause on his end. Brief. Then, "I can have a meeting arranged by Thursday. I want to arrange it myself." "I know." Another pause. "I'm not going to manage you, Charlotte. That's not what this is." She registered the use of her first name. He had been using her last name, formally, until this moment. She filed it away. "Thursday works," she said. "And Sebastian?" "Yes. If this goes the way I think it can go, Roman's going to notice." "He's going to notice regardless," Sebastian said. "The question is whether you're positioned by the time he does." She felt something shift in her chest, not the warm, hopeful feeling she associated with vulnerability. She was done with that particular sensation until further notice. This was different, colder, more structural, the feeling of understanding, clearly and without sentimentality, what she was actually doing. "Good night," she said. "Good night." She hung up and sat in the quiet apartment with the city below her window. Different floor, different address. Hers. She opened her laptop and pulled up the file she had started 3 days ago. A business plan for Bennett Signature Events 2.0, rebuilt from first principles. She had been adding to it in increments, the way you approach something you want very badly and are not yet ready to fully name wanting. 10 pages of notes. Supplier contacts she had maintained quietly, through birthday messages and check-in emails, over 3 years of absence. Market analysis of the luxury event space in Chicago, which had shifted in her time away and shifted in directions that, if anything, played to her strengths. She read back through what she had written. It was good. She had forgotten, in 3 years of being someone's wife, in a life that had no room for what she was actually capable of, that she was good at this. She closed the laptop, turned off the light, lay in the dark with her hands flat on the sheet beside her and looked at the ceiling. She was not happy yet. She was not fixed. She was not the woman on the other side of the story. She was somewhere in the rough, unlit middle of it, with a divorce proceeding that was about to get uglier and a new arrangement with a man she was not yet sure of, and 3 years of rust on every skill she was planning to stake her recovery on. But she was pointed in a direction, and the direction was forward. The Meridian Foundation meeting happened on a cold Thursday in the 3rd week of November. Charlotte wore a charcoal blazer and dark trousers, and the specific expression she had once described to Victoria as her "I already know the answer and I'm waiting for you to figure that out" face. Not arrogance exactly, but the settled certainty of someone who had done the preparation and knew the room. She walked in alone. Sebastian's name was on the letter of introduction, but Charlotte Bennett walked through the door by herself, because that was the only way this meant what she needed it to mean. The Meridian Foundation's event director was a woman named Patricia Chow, 50-something, meticulous, the kind of professional who had survived 20 years in the non-profit-adjacent luxury circuit by being exactly as sharp as she appeared and not 1 degree sharper, so that people consistently underestimated her by precisely the right amount. She looked at Charlotte across the conference table with the particular expression of someone who has been given a reference from an unexpected source and is recalibrating in real time. "Sebastian Kane sent a personal note," Patricia said. Not accusatory. Assessing. "He did," Charlotte said. "We have a business arrangement. But the reason I'm here is that I ran the Alderton Foundation Gala 7 years ago, the St. Aldine Hospital Benefit 4 years ago, and the Lakeshore Art Benefit 3 years ago, and I held the event record for seamless execution on the last 2 without a single incident report." She laid a folder on the table. "My credentials and client references are in there. The Kane letter is context. The record is the reason." Patricia looked at the folder for a moment. Then she opened it. The meeting lasted 2 hours and 14 minutes. Charlotte walked out with a provisional contract for the Meridian Foundation's Spring Gala, the largest single event commission in Chicago's nonprofit calendar, at a number that would serve as the seed capital for the full relaunch of Bennett's signature events. She stood on the sidewalk outside the building in the cold November air and felt the wind off the lake against her face, sharp and indifferent, the city smell of exhaust and concrete and distance. She pulled out her phone and called Victoria. "I got it," she said. Victoria screamed, loudly enough that a man passing by on the sidewalk looked over with mild alarm. "I got it," Charlotte said again, and her voice cracked on the second syllable in the way voices crack when the thing you've been holding together finally gets to put down some of its weight. She stood on that sidewalk for 3 minutes, not moving, while Victoria talked. The wind came off the lake and the city moved around her, indifferent and alive. And Charlotte Bennett stood in the middle of it and let herself feel, briefly and completely, what it was like to have walked back into a room that had once been hers. It was in the same week that Victoria called her at 7 in the morning with a voice that had gone flat in the specific way that meant information was incoming that she wasn't going to like. "Roman knows," Victoria said, "about the Meridian contract. It's been around, Charlie. People talk." Charlotte was already awake. She had been awake since 5, reviewing vendor contracts, which was the kind of thing she now did voluntarily at 5 in the morning because she had remembered that she was a person who functioned at that level and had simply been living somewhere that didn't want her to use it. "Okay," she said. "He's been telling people you're leveraging his connections to relaunch, that the Meridian meeting only happened because of his name in the city." Charlotte set down her coffee cup very carefully. "That's what he's saying. That's what he's saying." She breathed in through her nose, slow. The anger was there. She could feel it like something physical, a heat behind her sternum that wanted to expand. But she had learned in the months since the divorce filing that anger spent without direction was just noise. Roman was trying to reframe her success as derivative of his name because the alternative, acknowledging that she had rebuilt herself, that she was operating again, that she had resources and connections, an ability that existed entirely independent of him, was something his particular architecture of self could not accommodate. "What's he actually doing about it?" she asked. "Beyond talking," Victoria paused. "He had someone reach out to Patricia Chow." Charlotte went still. "Saying what?" "Questioning your financial stability, suggesting the relaunch is premature, implying, and this is the part that should concern you, that there are certain relationships in the city that might find it inconvenient if Meridian moved forward with you." Charlotte was quiet for a long moment. "Is Patricia Chow the kind of woman who responds to that kind of pressure?" she said finally. "I don't know her well enough." "I do." Charlotte thought about the 2-hour and 14-minute meeting, about the way Patricia had opened the folder and read every page with the attention of someone who made decisions based on evidence. "She's not." "Charlotte." "He's scared," Charlotte said. The certainty of it settled over her like something heavy and clarifying. "He's not trying to stop me because he thinks he can. He's trying to stop me because he's already realized he can't, and he needs to do something with that. That doesn't make it less dangerous." "No," Charlotte agreed. "It doesn't." She hung up with Victoria and sat for a moment in her kitchen, with the early light coming through the windows she had hung with curtains. She had chosen herself in colors that had nothing to do with what Roman's penthouse required. Then she called Sebastian. He picked up immediately. "Roman put pressure on Meridian," she said. "I know." A pause. It didn't land. Charlotte was quiet for a beat. "You were already monitoring it. I became aware of it last night. And you didn't call me. I was waiting to see if it required action before I brought it to you. It didn't. Patricia Chow called my office this morning and told me someone had reached out questioning your credentials. She wanted to confirm our arrangement was solid. I confirmed it. The contract stands." Charlotte sat with this. Part of her wanted to be irritated. She had asked to handle her own meetings, her own relationships. But she could hear in the clean, factual delivery of how he described it that he had not managed her. He had managed a threat, and the result was that her work stood on its own. "He's going to escalate," she said. "He is," Sebastian said. "He won't be quiet about this. Losing things quietly isn't in his vocabulary." "What are you not telling me?" The silence on Sebastian's end had a quality she was beginning to learn. Not evasion, but the particular pause of someone deciding how much of the full picture to put on the table. "There are movements in Roman's operation," he said, finally. "Financial, structural. Someone is applying pressure to specific parts of his infrastructure from inside. Not dramatically, quietly. The kind of thing that looks like ordinary business difficulty until you map the pattern. Charlotte understood immediately. "That's you," she said. Sebastian didn't answer. "Sebastian." Her voice was flat and direct, and she felt the full weight of what she was saying. "If you are running an operation against Roman's business while simultaneously building something with me, I need to know. Not because I'm going to stop you, because I will not be blind to the thing happening around me again. I will not sit in that room again." The pause this time was long enough that the city sounds outside her window. Distant traffic, a horn, the low constant texture of a city in motion filled the silence. "Yes," he said quietly. "It's me." Charlotte breathed. "How long?" 14 months. The timeline landed like cold water. 14 months ago, she and Roman were still married. Technically. In the same apartment. Going through the motions of a life that had already emptied out. "You were doing this while I was still in that apartment?" "Yes." "Why?" "Because what he did to you was systematic and deliberate, and he had been doing it for years, and he was going to keep doing it, with you or with the next woman. And because—" a pause. "Because I had watched it long enough." Charlotte sat in the chair in her kitchen in the early light with the phone against her ear and felt something she couldn't immediately name. Not betrayal, not exactly, because she had not been harmed by what he described, had in fact been freed by its eventual consequence. But something adjacent to it, the feeling of understanding that the ground you've been standing on had forces moving through it you weren't aware of. "I need to think," she said. "I know. I'm not saying it changes what we're building, but I need to think." "Charlotte." His voice was quiet. Careful. Not apologetic in the performative way. In the real way, the way that acknowledges something genuine. "I should have told you sooner. That was a mistake. I'm telling you now." She wanted to say something cutting. She had several options available. Instead, she sat with the actual feeling, which was not rage. Rage would have been simpler, but a complicated, heavy mixture of gratitude and wariness, and the specific exhaustion of a woman who had believed things about her own life that turned out to be false, and was not entirely sure she could trust her own assessment of anything right now. "I'll call you tomorrow," she said. She sat in the kitchen for a long time after she hung up. Then she went to her laptop and opened the business plan. She worked until noon without stopping, because the one thing she was certain of, clearer than anything else in the complicated wreckage of this season of her life, was that the work was real. The contract was real. The company she was rebuilding was real, and it was hers and nobody, not Roman, and not Sebastian, and not anyone else who had interests in the situation surrounding her had built it. She had built it, and she was not going to stop. She was closing her laptop when her phone buzzed with a message from a number she recognized as belonging to Marcus Webb, one of Roman's senior associates, a man she had met perhaps 8 times during the marriage, always in professional contexts, always with the careful lateral awareness of someone whose loyalty was purchased and required maintenance. The message was 6 words. "He knows about Cain. Be careful." Charlotte stared at the screen. She read it again. Then she set the phone down on the table and looked at nothing for a long moment, while the full shape of what was coming began to assemble itself in the cold, clear light of her kitchen. Roman DeLuca knew. And Roman DeLuca, who did not know how to lose quietly, who had never in his life accepted a narrative he didn't control, who had built an empire on the principle that threats were met with disproportionate response before they fully formed. Roman DeLuca was going to come for both of them. Charlotte read Marcus Webb's message 4 times, not because the words were complicated. 6 words required no decoding, but because her brain kept running a secondary process underneath the reading, a rapid, involuntary audit of every decision she had made in the past 8 weeks, every conversation, every document sent, every meeting attended, every phone call made from a device she had assumed was private, searching for the specific point of entry, the crack in the wall, the place where Roman's awareness had gotten through. She put the phone face down on the table. Then she picked it up again and called Sebastian. He answered before the first ring completed, which meant he was already awake and already holding his phone, which meant he already knew or suspected something, and the realization of that, The confirmation that information moved around her before it reached her, still, even now, produced a specific cold anger she was careful to keep out of her voice. "Marcus Webb just texted me," she said. "Roman knows about you." A beat. Brief. "When did you get the message?" 4 minutes ago." "I got a call 40 minutes ago," Sebastian said. "From a contact inside Roman's operation. He's been aware of the connection between us for approximately 72 hours. Charlotte absorbed this with her back very straight and her free hand flat on the table in front of her. 72 hours? Yes. And you're telling me now. I was trying to assess the full picture before I brought it to you. I made a judgment call that... Stop. Her voice came out quieter than she intended, which made it more dangerous, not less. We talked this morning. You had 72 hours of information, and you talked to me about Patricia Chow and the Meridian contract, and you did not tell me Roman had been sitting on this for 3 days. Silence on his end. That was a mistake, he said finally. It was. She breathed in, even, controlled. What does he know exactly? That we've met. That there's a business arrangement. The specific nature of what I've been doing to his financial infrastructure. I don't know how much of that he has. If he knows enough to move on, it doesn't matter how much of the detail he has. Charlotte pushed back from the table and stood up. She needed to be vertical. The sitting still was making the anger compress in a way she didn't trust. What is he going to do? Roman's response to perceived threats has always been front-loaded, Sebastian said. He doesn't wait to confirm. He acts on suspicion because he'd rather be wrong and decisive than right and slow. So he's already moving. Almost certainly. Charlotte walked to the window. The city outside was in its mid-morning configuration. The delivery trucks, the pedestrians with coffee, the ordinary machinery of a Thursday that had no idea what was happening in her kitchen. I need to know everything, she said. Not the edited version. Not the version you've decided I'm ready for. Everything Roman knows. Everything you've been doing to his operation, and every person in the city whose position shifts based on what happens next. A pause. Tonight. In person. Charlotte. Tonight, Sebastian. The flatness in her voice was absolute. Or I walk into this alone and we both know that's worse for both of us. A pause. 7 o'clock, same place. She hung up. She stood at the window for a moment longer. The anger was still there. Not the explosive kind that burned itself out fast, but the cold structural kind, the kind that settled into load-bearing positions and held. She was angry at Sebastian for the withheld information. She was angry at Roman for being so predictably, exhaustingly Roman. She was angry at herself for the small, hopeful part of her that had, in the past 8 weeks, begun to relax its vigilance. She had known better. She had always known better. She picked up her phone and called Victoria. Victoria listened to the summary without interrupting. That silence again. The one that meant she was taking it seriously. "What are you going to do?" Victoria said when Charlotte finished. "I'm going to find out how bad it is tonight, and then I'm going to decide." "Decide what?" "How far I'm willing to go." Victoria was quiet for a moment. "Charlie, when you say that, I don't mean anything dramatic. I mean, I've been rebuilding with the assumption that I was operating on my own terms, outside Roman's reach. If that assumption is wrong, I need a different strategy." She paused. "I'm not going back to being invisible. I'm not going to dismantle what I've built, but I might need to be willing to use things I've been holding back." "What things?" Charlotte looked at the closed laptop on the table, the hard drive, the 4 years of documentation she had sent to Dana Fisk, but not all of it. She had sent Dana the financial records. She had not sent her the other files, the ones that documented not just Charlotte's contributions, but the specific structural details of how Roman's operation functioned, the accounts, the relationships, the arrangements that sat in the gray space between business and something that federal investigators would find considerably more interesting. She had kept those files the same way she had kept everything, not planning to use them, but knowing their value. "I'll tell you after tonight," she said. The whiskey lounge was different at 7 in the evening than it had been at their first meeting weeks ago. Fuller, the low amber light warmer against more occupied tables, the sound level just barely above intimate. Charlotte arrived 4 minutes early and was shown to the corner table, which was empty. She sat with her back to the wall, which she did deliberately, and watched the door. Sebastian arrived at 6:59. He looked, she thought, exactly like a man who had spent his day running contingency calculations. Contained, focused, the particular compression of someone managing multiple active variables while displaying none of them. He sat down across from her, ordered without being prompted by the server who appeared, and looked at her directly. "Tell me everything," she said. He told her everything. It took 90 minutes. He laid it out in the specific, unvarnished way of someone who had decided that partial information was no longer an option. The full 14 months of quiet pressure applied to Roman's infrastructure, the financial mechanisms he had used, the specific operations he had degraded, and why, the names of the people inside Roman's organization who had, over time and for various reasons, found it in their interest to cooperate with Sebastian's information gathering. He named the amounts involved. He named the timelines. He named the 2 operations he had effectively killed and the 3 more he had been slowing without Roman's awareness. Charlotte listened without interrupting. When he finished, she was quiet for a long moment. "You've been at war with him for over a year," she said. "Yes." "Using leverage you built specifically against his operation." "Yes." "And you started this before I was ever part of any equation." "Yes." He held her gaze. "Charlotte, Roman DeLuca has been running an operation that destroys people quietly. Not through violence, primarily, but through systematic extraction. He finds people with value, he integrates them into his world, and he absorbs what they have until they have nothing left that's useful to him. You were not his first. You were not going to be his last." Charlotte felt something land in her chest at that, heavy and specific. "How many others?" she said. "Before you?" "2 that I tracked closely. A financial analyst named Peter Grange, who lost his practice. A woman named Sonia Marsh, who ran a private consulting firm. Roman used her access to 3 major city contracts and then let her take the blame when one of the deals went sideways. She left Chicago." He paused. "You were different because you were more capable than the others. He needed you longer. And because of that, he took more." Charlotte looked at the table, the condensation ring from her glass, the wood grain beneath it. "You should have told me this from the beginning," she said. "I know. Not tonight, the first night, in this room, before I agreed to anything. I know." His voice was quiet. "I was afraid if I came in with the full picture at once, the history, the operation, all of it, you would see another man with an agenda and you would walk out. And I—" He stopped. "And you what?" "I didn't want you to walk out." He said it the same way he had said everything tonight. Without decoration, without softening, with the particular honesty of someone who had run out of room to manage the presentation. That was selfish, and it was a mistake. Charlotte looked at him for a long time. The antenna was still running, still reading, still telling her the same fundamental thing it had been telling her since the first night. But she was also sitting with the full weight of what he had just told her, and the full weight was considerable. And she was not the woman she had been 5 years ago who confused the warmth of being chosen for the safety of being known. "What does Roman do next?" she said finally, because that was the operative question. Her feelings about Sebastian's choices were real, and she would deal with them, but not right now, not tonight, because tonight there was a man who did not know how to lose quietly, who had just had 72 hours to develop a plan. "He has 3 options," Sebastian said. "He moves legally, through the divorce proceedings, accelerating the financial discovery process, trying to tie up your business assets before the relaunch gains momentum. He moves through influence, using his network to close doors on you before you can open them, which is what the Meridian approach was a version of. Or he moves directly. Directly meaning he decides that the cleanest solution to the problem of Sebastian Kane is removing the problem, not through legitimate means." The table was very quiet. "He's done that before," Charlotte said. Not a question. "Yes," she absorbed this. "Are you afraid of him?" Sebastian looked at her steadily. "I'm appropriately concerned. There's a difference." A pause. "I've been operating in proximity to dangerous men for 15 years. I'm not without resources or preparation, but the nature of direct action is that it operates on timing you don't control. So what do? We move faster than he expected us to." Sebastian leaned forward. "The Meridian Gala is in 6 weeks. If we can make that event the relaunch moment, if you are publicly, visibly, and very successfully back in operation at that level, Roman's ability to reframe you as someone operating in his shadow disappears. You become something he can't touch without it looking like what it is. And your operation against his infrastructure continues, but I accelerate the final phase. He paused. There are two financial channels Roman has left that are genuinely load-bearing. If they go, his operation doesn't collapse. He has too many redundancies for that. But it contracts significantly and quickly. Enough that managing the contraction takes most of his operational attention. Charlotte looked at him. You've been waiting to do that. I've been waiting to make sure the timing served the right outcome. Which is you being fully relaunched and independently operational before his attention fully turns to you. He met her eyes directly. Right now you're a secondary target. The primary irritant, from his perspective, is me. If we move correctly in the next 6 weeks, by the time his operation is contracted enough that he needs to redirect, you are established enough that coming after you costs him more than leaving you alone. Charlotte sat with this. It was a good plan. She could see the architecture of it, the logic, the sequencing. She could also see that it was a plan built around a variable it couldn't fully control, which was Roman himself, a man whose decision-making, under pressure, had never been fully rational. Roman's instincts were predatory, and his ego was structural to his operation in a way that meant he would sometimes accept worse outcomes in order to assert dominance over a situation. That was the variable. There's something else, Charlotte said slowly. Sebastian waited. I have documentation. From the marriage. Financial records, communication records, strategic planning documents. The ones I gave Donna are the surface layer, the material that establishes my business contributions. She paused. I have a second layer. Records of how his operation actually functions. Accounts. Relationships. Arrangements that would be significant to certain investigators. Sebastian was very still. How detailed, he said. Detailed enough. Charlotte kept her voice even. I never planned to use them. I kept them because I built things and I document what I build, but I have them. If that material surfaces in the wrong context, I know what it is, Charlotte said. I'm not naive about what I'm holding. She paused. I'm also not naive about the fact that Roman knowing I have it might be the most effective version of using it, without actually using it. The silence between them had a different quality now. Not difficult, something more like the silence of two people who have just arrived at the same calculation from different directions and are checking that they're seeing the same thing. You're describing a deterrent, Sebastian said. I'm describing an option, Charlotte said. One I'm telling you about because you told me everything tonight. And because if we're doing this together, we need to be working with the same information. Sebastian looked at her for a long moment. Where is it? He said. Safe. She held his gaze. You don't need to know more than that right now. Something moved across his face that she thought might have been respect. Fair. She picked up her glass and finished the whiskey and set it down. 6 weeks, she said. We make Meridian the moment, and we don't give Roman enough clear air to develop a plan he can execute. Agreed. She stood up and put on her coat. Sebastian stood as she did. Charlotte. His voice stopped her before she turned. For what it's worth, I am sorry for the things I withheld, not because it changes the outcome, but because you deserve to know. She looked at him for a moment. I know, she said. We'll figure out what that means for us later. Right now, we have 6 weeks. She walked out into the night air and let the cold settle over her and thought, with the precise, unsentimental clarity of someone who had stopped softening the shape of her own thoughts, that she was operating in territory she had not anticipated entering when she signed the first divorce papers 3 months ago. She was not frightened. She was focused. Those were different things. The following morning, her phone rang at 6:47 with Dana Fisk's name on the screen, and the quality of Dana Fisk's voice when Charlotte answered, clipped, contained, the tone of a professional delivering news she has organized herself to deliver correctly, told Charlotte before the first sentence that the call was not routine. Roman's legal team filed an emergency motion this morning, Dana said. They're alleging financial misconduct. Specifically, they're claiming that you diverted business capital from joint marital accounts to fund an undisclosed private business venture. Bennett's signature events, without Roman's knowledge or consent. Charlotte stood in her kitchen in complete stillness. "That's backwards," she said. "The capital flows were from my company to his operation. I have 4 years of documentation." "I know," Dana said. "Our documentation is solid, but Charlotte, that's not actually what concerns me about this filing." A pause. "They attached supplementary evidence, communications, internal strategy documents from Roman's operation." Another pause, careful, deliberate. "Charlotte, some of this material, these attached documents, they reference your involvement in strategic planning decisions that were not purely business. There are notations that describe you as an active participant in decisions that go beyond event management." Charlotte felt the kitchen become very cold. "What kind of decisions?" she said carefully. "The kind," Dana said, "that a federal prosecutor would describe as conspiracy to facilitate financial fraud, at minimum." Charlotte sat down. She sat down because her legs had made a unilateral decision on that point. "Roman is filing documents that implicate me," she said. Not a question. The shape of what was happening assembled itself in her mind with the horrible clean speed of something that had always been true and had simply been waiting for the moment to become visible. "He is filing documents that blur the line between your legitimate contributions and his illegal operations," Dana said, very carefully, very specifically. "Charlotte, this is not a financial dispute anymore. If this motion proceeds and these attachments enter the record—" "He's trying to make me radioactive," Charlotte said. "If I'm implicated, even under suspicion, I can't operate. The Meridian contract disappears. Every door I've opened in the past 6 weeks closes. No one in the city will touch me while there's a legal cloud." "Yes," Dana said quietly. "That's exactly what this is." Charlotte's hand was very steady on the phone. She noted that distantly, the steadiness, and understood it as something that had come from the other side of shock, where the body gets very calm because it has recognized that panic is not an available option. "How much time do we have before the motion is heard?" she said. 10 days. 10 days. "What do you need from me?" Charlotte said. "I need every document you have. Not just what you sent me. Everything." Dana's voice was careful. "Charlotte, if there's anything in your records that could cut both ways, anything that places you in proximity to decisions you don't want scrutiny on, I need to know before the court does." Charlotte looked at the laptop, the hard drive, the second layer of documentation she had described to Sebastian the night before, the detailed records of how Roman's operation functioned, the records that documented Roman's illegal infrastructure, the records that also, in several places, showed Charlotte Bennett present in rooms where strategic decisions about that infrastructure were made, not as a participant, as the event planner, as the woman managing the public face of gatherings where, in back rooms she had sometimes glimpsed and mostly ignored, other things were being decided. She had not participated, but she had been there, and Roman's lawyers had taken those same facts, her presence, her proximity, her competence at managing environments where his operation conducted business, and constructed an alternative narrative in which she was not a victim of his extraction, but a knowing partner in it. She had given him the material by being good at her job. "I'll have everything to you by end of day," Charlotte said. She hung up and sat at the kitchen table for exactly 2 minutes in complete stillness. Then she called Sebastian. He answered immediately. "Roman didn't go direct," she said. Her voice was flat. "He went surgical. He filed court documents this morning that implicate me in his operation. He's using my own work history against me." The silence on Sebastian's end had a quality she had never heard from him before. Something had shifted in it, a tightening, a pulling together, the specific sound of a man recognizing that the thing he had been trying to prevent had happened anyway, and on a timeline he hadn't anticipated. "How much does he have?" Sebastian said. "Enough to make my presence in certain rooms look like participation, enough to create a cloud that kills everything I've rebuilt." She paused. "He didn't go after you, Sebastian. He went after me. Because taking me down costs you the strategic partner you need and costs me everything I've rebuilt, and he can do it through the courts rather than anything that traces back to him directly." "Charlotte, he's smarter than you gave him credit for." She said it without heat. It was just a fact. "We were watching for the direct move. He didn't make the direct move." "What do you need?" Charlotte looked at the hard drive. She thought about the second layer of documentation. The records that established her innocence in the decision-making processes Roman was claiming she participated in, because those same records showed, with precise detail, that the decisions were made in rooms she serviced but did not inhabit, by people whose names were in those documents in ways that would be considerably more legally damaging to Roman than any motion his lawyers had filed this morning. The deterrent. She had told Sebastian it was an option she was holding. She had not expected to need it in 10 days. "I need you to understand something," she said. Her voice was very quiet. "The documentation I told you about last night, if I use it, it doesn't just protect me. It detonates his entire operation. The exposure isn't surgical, it's comprehensive." "I understand that." "Do you?" She paused. "Because once I give those documents to Dana and Dana uses them in this proceeding, there is no version of this where Roman comes out manageable. He doesn't get reduced, he gets dismantled." "Charlotte." Sebastian's voice had gone to the same register hers was in, quiet, certain, past the point of softening. "He already chose this. The moment he filed those documents, he chose what kind of war this was." Charlotte looked in the window. The morning light was very clean and cold, the way Chicago light got in November when the sky was clear and the temperature had dropped overnight and everything was sharp-edged and without illusion. She thought about 5 years. She thought about the crimson dress and the candles and the dish towel over her forearm and the silence that had followed. You really stopped taking care of yourself like a verdict. No one appealed. She thought about Peter Grange and Sonia Marsh and the women before her and after her that Sebastian had not tracked closely enough to name. She thought about the fact that she had been in those rooms because she was exceptional at her work, that her presence had been used retroactively to construct a story in which she was complicit in things done around her without her consent, that Roman DeLuca had taken her competence and her loyalty and her years and built them into a cage, and now that she was out, he was planning to use the bars of that cage to put her back inside it through a legal system that would believe the documents over the woman. Not if she moved first. She stood up from the kitchen table and walked to the drawer where the hard drive was and took it out and held it in her hand. It was small. The weight of it was negligible. The weight of what was on it was something else entirely. She thought about the version of herself that had walked into this situation wanting to rebuild quietly and stay outside Roman's radius, and simply recover what was hers without escalation. That version of events was finished. Roman had finished it this morning at 6:47. What was left now was not the woman who pressed a tablecloth and lit candles and waited. What was left was the woman who had kept every document for 4 years because she had always known, somewhere beneath the hope and the sacrifice and the love she had tried to make real, that the day might come when survival required her to use what she had built. She put the hard drive in her bag. She called Dana Fisk back. "I'm coming in," she said. "I have the full documentation package. Everything." A pause. "Dana, when you see what's in this, you're going to ask me whether I'm sure I want to proceed." "And are you?" Dana said. Charlotte picked up her coat from the chair by the door. She looked around the apartment. The curtains she had chosen, the clean, spare space that was entirely and completely hers, and felt something settle in her chest that was not peace exactly, and not rage exactly, but some third thing, colder and more permanent than either. "Tell me when you want me there," she said. Dana Fisk's office was on the 19th floor of a building on LaSalle Street that had been housing attorneys long enough that the marble in the lobby had worn smooth in the center from a century of people walking in with problems and walking out with outcomes they hadn't fully anticipated. Charlotte arrived at 9:14. Dana met her at the elevator, which was unusual. Dana was not a woman who met clients at elevators. Dana was a woman who had clients brought to her by assistants, and the quality of her expression as the doors opened told Charlotte everything she needed to know about how Dana had spent the 40 minutes since their phone call. "Come in," Dana said. "Close the door." The office was corner-facing, 2 walls of glass overlooking the intersection of LaSalle and Monroe, Chicago in full gray November configuration below. Dana sat behind her desk, and Charlotte sat across from it and put the hard drive on the surface between them without ceremony. Dana looked at it. "Walk me through what's on it," she said. Charlotte walked her through it. She went in order methodically, the way she had organized the files, by date, by type, by the specific category of information each document contained. The financial transfer records, which they had already discussed, the communication threads that documented her strategic contributions, and then the second layer, the operational records. The documents she had created and kept as a function of her work. Event logistics that referenced in passing the real purpose of certain gatherings. Attendee lists that cross-referenced, if you knew what you were looking at, with the financial arrangements Sebastian had described. Communication chains in which Charlotte's event planning emails existed alongside, and occasionally directly adjacent to, exchanges about operational decisions that had nothing to do with catering. She had not participated in those decisions, but she had been meticulous about documentation, and meticulous documentation captured context, and the context was damning, not of Charlotte, but of the full architecture of what Roman had been running in the room she had been hired to make presentable. Dana listened without a single interruption. When Charlotte finished, the office was very quiet. Dana picked up the hard drive, turned it over once in her hand, set it back down. "This establishes your innocence in the conspiracy allegation," she said. "The timeline of the communications makes it clear that decisions were made in channels you weren't part of. You were servicing events, not planning operations." A pause. "It also, if submitted as evidence, exposes the full structure of what those operations were. Names, dates, financial flows. This is not just material that protects you in a divorce proceeding." "I know what it is," Charlotte said. "If I submit this, the court record becomes accessible to—" "Oh, I know." Dana studied her. "You understand that Roman will understand immediately what you've done, and that his response will not be measured." "He already moved against me," Charlotte said. "This morning. He chose the terms. I'm accepting them." Dana was quiet for a moment. The specific quiet of a lawyer who has assessed a situation and arrived at a position. "I need 48 hours to build the submission correctly," she said. "The framing matters. This needs to enter the record in a way that makes your role as a documenting witness, not a participant, absolutely unambiguous before Roman's team has time to construct a counter-narrative." "You have 48 hours," Charlotte said. She stood up. Dana stood too. "Charlotte?" Dana's voice stopped her. "Once this is filed, it cannot be unfiled. Whatever happens after, with Roman, with the proceedings, with anything else, this is the decision that defines the next chapter." Charlotte picked up her bag. "The last chapter was defined by someone else's decisions," she said. "This one's mine." She walked out. The 48 hours had a texture she would remember for a long time. She worked. She worked with the specific concentrated force of someone who understood that the Meridian Gala in 6 weeks was now not just a business relaunch, but the public declaration of a position, that Charlotte Bennett was operational, credible, and untouchable by the cloud Roman had attempted to create, and that every detail of that event needed to be flawless in a way that left no room for the narrative Roman was trying to write. She met with vendors. She confirmed the venue's technical setup. She had 3 calls with Patricia Chow's team, and on each one, she was precise and calm and completely authoritative. The version of herself that had run rooms full of powerful people without breaking a sweat. And she felt it coming back into her body like blood returning to a limb that had been held at an awkward angle for years. The pins and needles of capability reasserting itself. Sebastian texted twice. Brief, informational. He had accelerated the financial pressure on Roman's 2 remaining load-bearing channels. The effects would begin showing in Roman's operational accounts within 72 hours. She replied with single confirmations. She was not cold toward him. She did not have the bandwidth right now for the full conversation about withheld information and trust, and what they were actually building together, and she knew Sebastian understood that because he was not pushing for it. He was holding the operational lane and leaving her the space to hold hers. That was, she thought, something. Victoria came over the second evening with wine and the specific energy of a woman who understood that her friend did not need comfort right now but needed company. And those were different things. They sat on Charlotte's couch and Victoria did not ask about Roman or Sebastian or the legal proceedings, and instead talked about the Meridian Gala guest list and which vendors Charlotte was using and what the room layout would be, and Charlotte talked about it with the same focused energy she'd been running on for 2 days. And somewhere in the second glass of wine, Victoria said quietly, "You're different." Charlotte looked at her. "Different how?" "You're not managing anything right now." Victoria tilted her head. "Not managing me. Not managing how you seem. You're just here. A pause. You haven't done that in a long time. Charlotte considered this. I don't have the energy to manage anything, she said. There's too much actual work. Victoria smiled. I know. That's what I mean. Dana called at 6:43 the following morning. It's filed, she said. Charlotte was already dressed. She had been awake since 4:30. How long until Roman's team sees it, she said. Court filings are available to opposing counsel as of 7 a.m., Dana said. So, approximately 13 minutes. Charlotte looked at the window. The city was still dark, just the first gray at the edges. What happens now? She said. Now we wait for their response. They'll have 24 hours to file an emergency counter motion if they want to challenge the submission. A pause. Charlotte, prepare for noise. Roman is going to make noise. I know. Public noise, not just legal. I know, she said again. She made coffee. She drank it at the window. The city came up slowly out of the dark the way it did, the lights resolving from indistinct glow into specific buildings, into specific windows with specific lives behind them. She had always loved this hour in Chicago, the city in the process of becoming itself again. At 7:22, her phone rang with a number she didn't recognize. She answered it. You made a mistake. Roman's voice, completely controlled. The particular flatness of a man who had woken up to devastating news and had spent the intervening time constructing the voice he planned to use. A very significant mistake. Charlotte sat down at the kitchen table. Her hand around the coffee cup was steady. She noted the steadiness. Roman, she said, that material is privileged. It was obtained during the marriage in a context of... It was created by me, Charlotte said, as part of my professional work. It has my name on the documents as the originating party. Dana's submission makes that distinction very clearly. A pause. She could hear him breathing, controlled breathing, the specific rhythm of a man working to keep his voice even when what he wanted to do was something that would not serve his interests. You don't understand what you've done, he said. I understand exactly what I've done. There are people in those documents who are going to be held accountable for the things they did in those rooms, Charlotte said. Yes, that's generally what happens when documentation enters a legal record. Charlotte. His voice dropped. Quieter. More dangerous in the way that quiet things are more dangerous than loud ones. I gave you 5 years. I gave you a life. You took 5 years. Her voice was flat. You took a business I built, and a network I built, and 3 years of my professional identity, and you absorbed all of it into your operation, and then you walked into the apartment I maintained with another woman on your arm and told me you wanted a divorce. A pause. And then when I rebuilt myself, you tried to use a court filing to make me complicit in your crimes. You chose every single step of this, Roman. Every one. Silence. What do you want? He said finally. I want the settlement Dana proposed 3 months ago. My business assets, my contact network, my premarital capital. Clean. Without conditions. She paused. I want you to withdraw the conspiracy allegation and the supplementary attachments by end of business today, and I want you to leave me alone. And if I don't, then the submission stays in the record, and whatever process follows that proceeds without my intervention. She let that sit for a moment. I'm not trying to destroy you, Roman. I'm trying to be done with you. Those are two different things. You're the one who made them feel the same. The silence stretched long enough that she thought he might hang up. Then, I'll have my attorneys call Dana. He hung up. Charlotte set the phone on the table and sat for a moment in the complete silence of her apartment. Then she exhaled, long, slow, the kind of breath that had been compressed somewhere in her chest for approximately 4 days and had been waiting for the specific moment it was safe enough to come out. She called Sebastian. He called, she said. He's going to have his attorneys contact Dana. Sebastian was quiet for a moment. That was faster than I expected. He's not stupid, Charlotte said. He knows when a position is untenable. How are you? She thought about it honestly. I don't know yet. Ask me in a week. A pause. Charlotte, whatever comes next, between us, between what we're building, I want you to know that what you did this morning took a kind of clarity that most people don't have. It took 4 years of documentation, she said, and a very good attorney. It took knowing what you were worth, he said quietly. The whole time. Even when someone was working very hard to make you forget it. Charlotte looked out the window at the city in full morning configuration now, loud and alive and completely indifferent to the specific private seismic events of her last 4 days. Get some sleep, she said. We have 5 weeks until Meridian. The settlement negotiation took 11 days. Roman's attorneys were good. They were expensive good, the kind that found angles in documents that other attorneys missed. But Dana was better, and Charlotte's documentation was comprehensive enough that every angle they found led back to the same foundation. Charlotte had built what she had built, and the record showed it. And the only question was how much Roman was willing to spend in time and exposure fighting a position he was not going to improve. He withdrew the conspiracy allegation on day 4. The supplementary attachments were removed from the record on day 6. The settlement terms were agreed on day 11. Her business assets, the contact network, the premarital capital. Clean. What she had asked for. Dana called her with the final confirmation at 3:47 in the afternoon, and Charlotte was in the middle of a venue walkthrough for Meridian, standing in the center of a ballroom in the 12 South Hotel with her phone in one hand and a floor plan in the other, and the event coordinator standing across from her watched Charlotte Bennett receive what was evidently significant news and then fold the phone into her jacket pocket and look back at the floor plan without missing a beat. The stage lighting, Charlotte said. I want to move it 6 feet north. The current position creates a shadow on the east entrance that's going to affect the photography. The event coordinator made a note. Charlotte walked the room. The room was going to be extraordinary. She could see it already. Not just the physical space, but the event that would fill it. The specific quality of a room that had been designed by someone who understood that an environment was not a backdrop, but a participant. That the architecture of a gathering shaped every conversation that happened inside it. She had always known how to make rooms feel inevitable, like the event couldn't have happened anywhere else. She had missed this. She had missed it with a specific physical ache that she hadn't let herself fully feel until right now, walking this floor with a plan in her hand and a settlement in her pocket, and 5 weeks to build the thing that would announce to every room in this city that had quietly closed when Roman's name became associated with her departure, that Charlotte Bennett was back. Not back like before. Back like someone who had been away long enough to understand what she actually had. The Meridian Foundation Gala fell on the second Saturday of December. Chicago in December had a specific quality that other cities' winters lacked. The way the lake amplified everything, made the cold personal and direct, made the lit windows of buildings against the dark sky feel necessary in a way that suggested warmth was something earned rather than assumed. The 12 South Hotel's ballroom occupied the top 2 floors of a building overlooking the river, and on the evening of the gala, the city spread below it in full winter configuration, lights, bridges, the dark glittering water, the specific drama of a city that knew it was beautiful and did not apologize for it. Charlotte had been inside the building since 7 in the morning, 11 hours of final preparation. The kind of day that would have destroyed her 3 years ago in the depleted version of herself she had been living as. But today she was running on something that didn't feel like adrenaline exactly, more like the full extension of every capability she had, every skill, every instinct that had been sitting in compression for years and was now operating at its actual capacity. Her team was good. She had hired carefully, people she had worked with before, or people who came with a specific kind of recommendation that meant they didn't need to be managed. They needed to be directed. And Charlotte directed them with the clean precision of someone who saw the full picture and could give instructions that accounted for every moving part simultaneously. By 6:15, the room was ready. Charlotte stood in the center of the empty ballroom for 3 minutes before the first guests arrived. It was perfect. Not perfect in the antiseptic way of rooms that had been decorated by people who were afraid of bold choices. Perfect in the way of rooms that had been built by someone with a specific vision and the technical ability to execute it without compromise. The lighting was exactly what she had specified. The table arrangements had the proportion she had argued for against the venue coordinator's more conservative instinct. The stage position was 6 feet north of where it had originally been planned, and the east entrance was clean and well lit, and the photographers who were already setting up near it were positioned exactly where the shot would reward them. She exhaled once in the empty room. Then she put on the face, not a performance, not a mask, but the full presence of herself as the person who ran this room, and went to meet the arriving guests. Sebastian arrived at 7:45. He came through the east entrance in a dark suit with no tie, and the first time Charlotte saw him across the room, she was deep in a conversation with two board members of the Meridian Foundation and could not go to him, but their eyes met across the distance and he gave her the smallest possible nod. The nod of someone who had walked into a room and immediately understood that the person who built it had done something exceptional. And she held that for a moment before turning back to the conversation. The evening ran. It ran the way great events ran, with the invisible precision of machinery that had been calibrated so carefully that no one experienced it as machinery at all. They experienced it as an atmosphere, as a night that felt better than nights usually felt, as a gathering where the conversations were better and the room was more beautiful and something ineffable but real was operating underneath the surface of the social event and making everything that happened inside it feel like it mattered. Charlotte moved through it all. She was everywhere and noticed almost nowhere. The mark of a great event director, the capacity to be present in every part of the room without dominating any of it. She resolved a small crisis with the catering timeline at 8:30 without the guests at the adjacent table registering that anything had required resolution. She introduced 3 pairs of attendees who had not known each other and would, she had assessed correctly, find each other professionally valuable. She managed the program timing with the easy authority of someone who knew exactly how long everything took and had built the margins in advance. And at 9:12, she was standing near the north bar with a glass of sparkling water she hadn't drunk when she looked across the room and saw Roman DeLuca walk through the east entrance. Her first response was not fear. Her first response was a kind of cold, clear alertness. The specific state of a woman who had spent the last 10 weeks building toward this moment and had always known somewhere in the operational calculation that this moment was coming. Roman had not been on the guest list. He was here anyway. He was wearing a charcoal suit, a different one than the night he had ended their marriage, though she noted the similarity with the detached irony of someone who had burned that detail into memory without choosing to. And he moved through the room with the careful, deliberate quality of a man who was not here socially. He was scanning, looking for something, looking for her. She did not move. She stood by the north bar with her sparkling water and let him find her because moving would have communicated something she had no intention of communicating. He crossed the room. People parted for him, not from affection, but from the old instinctive response to his specific physical presence. The quality that had always operated on rooms. She watched it happen with the dispassionate clarity of someone watching a mechanism she no longer lived inside. He stopped in front of her. Up close, he looked like a man who had not been sleeping well. The control was intact, the expression, the posture, the carefully maintained surface. But beneath it, something had shifted in the geography of his face. Something had tightened. "Impressive room," he said. "Thank you. Didn't take you long?" "No," she agreed. It didn't. He looked around the space. She watched him taking it in. The quality of the gathering, the caliber of the attendees, the specific social infrastructure of a room that had been built correctly. She watched him understand, in real time, what it meant that she had done this. "The settlement is processed," he said. "You have what you asked for." "I know. Dana confirmed it Thursday." He looked back at her. Direct. The full weight of his attention, she had forgotten, or had allowed herself to forget, how much of that there was. Roman DeLuca's full attention had always been a physical thing, something you felt on your skin. She felt it now, and noted it, and let it exist without responding to it the way she once would have, adjusting, softening, angling herself to receive it correctly. She simply looked back at him. "I didn't think you had it in you," he said. His voice was quiet enough that only she could hear it in the room's ambient noise. "I know," she said. "That was a miscalculation." Something moved across his face. "The documents you submitted, the people referenced in them, are managing their own situations," Charlotte said. "That's not my concern." "Charlotte." He said her name with a different quality than he had used in years. Not the administrative tone of their last months of marriage, not the flat delivery of "I want a divorce," but something older, something from earlier, from the version of him that had existed before the empire had consumed everything peripheral to it. "I know what I did to you. I know what I took." She looked at him steadily. "That's not an apology," she said. "No," he agreed. "It's not." A pause. "I'm not going to ask you to forgive." Good. Quiet. Final. Don't. A silence between them. Around them the room moved and laughed and clinked glasses and operated in complete ignorance of the specific seismic event happening by the north bar. Roman's jaw tightened for a moment, barely perceptible. The small physical tell she had learned in 5 years that meant he was saying something that cost him something. "He's not what he appears to be," Roman said, quietly. "Kane, whatever he's told you about himself, whatever picture he's painted, Roman," she stopped him with the single word, not harshly, but with the complete authority of someone who has made a decision and does not require input on it. "You don't get to warn me about the men in my life. You lost that standing the night you brought her through my front door." His mouth tightened. "I'm saying this because I know why you're saying it." She met his eyes. "And it doesn't matter. Not because I'm naive about Sebastian, but because whatever he is, I have gone into it with my eyes open, which is more than I can say for what I walked into with you." She paused. "You and I are settled, legally, professionally. I'm going to run this event tonight, and in 6 weeks I'm going to run the next one, and the one after that. My name is going to be in rooms in this city that forgot it for 3 years, and you're going to be in different rooms." She held his gaze. "That's the end of our story. It doesn't need more text." Roman looked at her for a long moment. The room moved around them. Then something happened in his face that she had never seen there before, in 5 years of watching that face manage itself. Something gave way. Briefly. Just a moment. The specific expression of a man who has finally and completely understood a loss he spent months refusing to look at directly. He nodded once. He turned and walked back toward the east entrance without speaking to anyone else in the room. Charlotte watched him go. She stood by the north bar with the sparkling water and watched the east entrance after he had gone through it. The door closing behind him, the room sealing itself back into its evening configuration as if he had never entered it. Her heart was doing something unusual in her chest. Not quite racing. More like running at a slightly higher register than normal. The elevated state of a woman who had just survived something she had been bracing for, had survived it on her own terms, standing on her own ground. Sebastian appeared at her right shoulder. He had seen. She knew from his positioning that he had been watching since Roman walked through the entrance, had held his distance because he had understood immediately that this was not something she needed someone standing beside her for. He said nothing. He simply stood next to her and looked out at the room. After a moment, Charlotte said, "He's gone." "I know." She took a sip of the water, set it down, looked at the room she had built, beautiful and full and running exactly as she had designed it, and felt the specific weight of the evening settling around her. "There's something you haven't told me yet," she said. Quiet. Not accusatory. "About what happens to his operation from here. The 2 channels you said were load-bearing." Sebastian was quiet for a moment. "The second one goes dark at midnight tonight," he said. "There's nothing traceable to either of us. It's clean." Charlotte looked at the room. "After tonight," she said, "I need the full picture. Everything. Not the version you've decided I can handle. Everything." "I know," he said. "And then we decide what we actually are to each other." She paused. "Not what's convenient. Not what's strategic. What's real." Sebastian turned slightly to look at her profile. She didn't look at him. She kept her eyes on the room. Her room, the room she had built in 5 weeks from a standing start with nothing but the capabilities she had always had and had been living without. "Okay," he said quietly. The word had weight. She registered it. Good. She straightened slightly. Patricia Chow was moving toward them from the south side of the room with the specific energy of someone who had something excellent to report. "Now smile, the night isn't over." Patricia reached them glowing with the particular satisfaction of a foundation director who had just been told by 3 separate board members that this was the best gala the Meridian Foundation had ever run. Charlotte listened to Patricia speak and nodded and said the right things and felt the evening expand around her. The beautiful, well-lit, perfectly calibrated evening she had built from the ground up. And underneath all of it, quiet and structural, The understanding that everything that was going to happen next was going to happen on her terms. She had made sure of it. Everything she had moved, everything she had filed, everything she had built in 6 weeks and decided in 10 days and survived in the months before that had converged into this room on this night, and the convergence was hers. But there was still the conversation waiting. There was still Sebastian, standing a foot to her right, who had 14 months of operations she hadn't known about, and a full picture she hadn't seen, and something between them that was real enough to matter and complicated enough to require honesty they hadn't fully had yet. There was still the morning after the best night. And as Patricia moved away and the room continued its beautiful, oblivious evening, and the city glittered outside the floor-to-ceiling windows, and Roman DeLuca walked through whatever door he had walked through on the other side of the east entrance, Charlotte Bennett stood in the center of everything she had built and understood that the hardest part wasn't the fight. The hardest part was what you did with yourself. The hardest part was what you did with yourself when the fight was over. Charlotte had known this intellectually for most of her adult life, had watched other people emerge from crises and flounder in the sudden absence of the pressure that had been organizing their days. But knowing it intellectually and living it were the familiar two different rooms, and the morning after the Meridian Gala she woke at 5:14 in her River North apartment and lay in the dark and felt the specific quality of the silence around her. Not the silence of absence, not the hollow silence of the penthouse, in the weeks after Roman had walked out, the silence of a space that had been emptied of something that was supposed to be there. This was different. This was the silence of completion, of a thing that had required every part of her having finally, for the moment, released its grip. She lay in it for a long time. Then she got up and made coffee and sat at the kitchen table in the dark, with both hands around the cup, and let herself be still in a way she hadn't been still in months. The gala had been flawless. Patricia Chow had called at 11:45 the previous night, from whatever car was taking her home, with the specific energy of someone who had just attended a personally significant professional event and needed to express that before she slept. 3 board members had already sent written notes. The event had run 7 minutes under schedule, which in the luxury nonprofit circuit was considered a form of genius. Charlotte had received 4 unsolicited inquiries about future engagements before midnight, 2 from board-adjacent people, 1 from a foundation director she had worked with 6 years ago, 1 from a private client whose name she recognized as belonging to exactly the kind of work she had been built to do. Bennett's Signature Events was back. Not as a possibility, not as a plan, as a fact, established in the public record of the city's social and professional infrastructure in the particular way that only a flawless execution of a significant event could establish it. People had been in that room. People who mattered in the ways that mattered in Chicago's specific hierarchies had experienced what Charlotte Bennett built, and they would remember it when they needed the next thing built. She had done it. The coffee cooled in her hands while the city came up outside her window. She thought about the conversation waiting. Sebastian had held his distance through the end of the gala, present, watchful, available, but giving her the room that the evening required her to occupy fully and alone. He had said goodnight outside the hotel at 11:15 with the quiet economy of a man who understood that there were things to be said between them and that a sidewalk at 11:15 after an 11-hour day was not the place to say them. She had agreed to meet him today, his apartment, which she had never been to. He had offered it as neutral ground of a particular kind, not his office, not a bar or a restaurant where the environment was managed and the exits were visible. His actual space. She had understood the offer for what it was, a form of reciprocity. She had spent months navigating the terms of his world. He was offering her a look at the edges of the actual man. She showered. She dressed in dark jeans and a cream sweater, the kind of clothes that required no performance. She ate toast standing at the counter. She looked at her phone and saw a message from Victoria sent at 12:47 in the morning. "You absolutely destroyed that room in the best possible way. Call me tomorrow, or today, whatever day it is. I love you." She wrote back, "I love you too. Talk later." She put on her coat and went to meet Sebastian. His building was in the West Loop, a converted warehouse on Randolph Street that had been done with the specific restraint of someone who had money and taste in equal measure and understood that they were most effective when neither announced itself. The lobby was industrial and quiet. The elevator was original cage style, which should have felt affectated and instead felt simply old. She rode it to the 8th floor and knocked on the door at the end of the hall at 9:47 in the morning. Sebastian opened the door. He was in a gray shirt and dark trousers, no jacket, and he looked, she registered this without ceremony, like a man who had also been awake for a significant portion of the night. Not disheveled, just present in the way people are present when they haven't been performing anything since the event ended. "Come in," he said. The apartment was large and spare and had the kind of light that only came from south-facing industrial windows. The wide, clean, generous light of a space that wasn't trying to hide anything. Books were the primary decoration, which she noted without surprise. A kitchen along one wall, a long table with papers that had been collected into a loose stack as if cleared in preparation for company, 2 chairs near the windows. He gestured toward the chairs. She sat. He brought coffee without asking, which she appreciated, and sat across from her. They looked at each other. "Last night," she said, "Roman, I saw. He came to tell me you're not what you appear to be." She watched his face. Those were his words. Sebastian looked at her steadily. "What did you tell him?" "That I wasn't interested in his assessment," she paused. "But I'm interested in yours." She set the coffee cup down. "I told you last night I needed the full picture, not the version you've decided I can handle. Everything." Sebastian was quiet for a moment, not evasive. The quiet of a man making a decision about sequence rather than content. "Ask me what you want to know," he said. "I'll answer everything." Charlotte looked at him. She had a list. She had been building it, in the back of her operational mind, since the night he had admitted to 14 months of running an operation against Roman's infrastructure while she was still living in the penthouse above it. The list had specific, concrete questions on it. She intended to ask everyone. "The 2 people inside Roman's organization who cooperated with your information gathering," she said. "Who were they and what did they get?" "A financial manager named David Reyes, who had his own reasons for wanting Roman's operation destabilized. Roman had been using Reyes' sister as a financial front without adequate protection, and Reyes wanted her out of exposure. He got that. And a woman named Anna Trask, who worked in Roman's administrative structure and had been trying to leave the organization for 2 years without success. She's currently in Seattle, with a clean record and a new name, which my attorney arranged." He paused. "I didn't pay either of them. I solved problems they already had." Charlotte noted this. "The financial pressure you applied to Roman's operation, the channels you degraded, were any of those actions traceable to me in any way?" "No." "Flat. Certain." "I was meticulous about that specifically. Your name, your assets, your professional activities were completely isolated from every operational move I made. If Roman had tried to make a legal argument connecting you to my actions against him, it would have collapsed under scrutiny." A pause. "That was the first condition I set when I began, before I reached out to you, before you were any part of this." Charlotte absorbed this. "You were protecting me before I knew I needed protecting. I was making sure that what I was doing couldn't be weaponized against you." He held her gaze. "There's a difference." "Is there?" "I wasn't protecting you because I thought you were weak," he said. "I was protecting the integrity of what I was doing. If my actions had exposure that touched you, the whole thing was compromised. It was clean architecture, not condescension." She sat with that. "The night Roman left," she said, "you were in the building. You set a standing arrangement with a tenant on the 32nd floor." "Yes." "What arrangement?" A brief pause. "A man named Jeffrey Harlan. He's been a source of information about Roman's political relationships for 2 years. He lives on 32. I meet with him approximately once a month." "So you weren't there because of me?" "I was there for Harlan," Sebastian said. "And then I saw Roman's car. And then I saw Roman leave with Evelyn Sinclair. And I stood in that lobby for approximately 4 minutes deciding whether to do something I had been thinking about for a long time, which was reaching out to me, which was reaching out to you." Charlotte looked at him. The light from the south windows was very clean and direct, and it showed him exactly as he was. Not young, not without the specific marks of a life lived in difficult proximity to difficult things, but looking back at her with the full and unguarded quality of someone who had made a choice to let himself be looked at clearly. I need to understand something, she said, about what you want. Not from the business arrangement, not from the strategic partnership. From me, specifically. Sebastian was quiet for a long moment. I want to be honest with you, he said finally. Without the version management, without deciding in advance what you can handle. He paused. I have not been good at that. You know the places where I've failed it. I'm not going to minimize them. I'm not asking for minimization. I know. He leaned forward slightly, elbows on his knees, holding her gaze. What I want, Charlotte. What I've wanted since I watched you run that room 9 years ago and kept watching from a distance because I was in no position then to be anything but a person at the edge of your story, is to be someone worth being in proximity to. Not a man who manages what you know about him, not another person who decides the shape of your world without telling you what he's doing. A pause. I want to be in rooms with you where neither of us is performing. That's what I want. The light moves slightly through the windows, a cloud passing, maybe. The quality of the morning adjusting itself. Charlotte looked at the man across from her, this man she had known for 8 weeks and for years, this man who had withheld and disclosed and been wrong and been right, and operated in the complicated moral geography of a world that did not run on clean choices. And she ran the antenna, the old instinct, still operational, still running on bedrock. It told her what it had been telling her since the unmarked door. She picked up her coffee cup. Sonia Marsh, she said. The woman who went to Seattle. The one Roman used and then let take the blame. Sebastian looked at her. What about her? I want to reach out to her. Through your attorney. Through whatever channel is appropriate. I want her to know that the person who used her operation as a tool has been managed. She paused. And I want to know if there's anything she needs. Sebastian held her gaze for a moment. Then, I'll arrange it. And Peter Grange? He's still in Chicago. He lost his practice, but he didn't leave. A pause. He's been working for a financial consulting firm on the North Side. Under his abilities. Charlotte nodded slowly. I might be able to use someone with his specific knowledge in what I'm building. Not as charity, as a hire, if he's interested. I'll think about it. Sebastian was quiet. What? She said. You just came through the hardest 2 months of your professional life, he said. Your first thought this morning is about the other people who were hurt. They were hurt by the same thing that hurt me, she said. That's not altruism, that's pattern recognition. She paused. Also, I'm a person who builds things. Building is easier with the right people. Something in his face changed. Not dramatically. Sebastian Kane's face did not do dramatic. But something released at the edges that had been held carefully before. Yes, he said quietly. It is. They sat in the clean morning light with their coffee and the city moving outside the south-facing windows, and Charlotte felt the specific texture of the silence between them. Not the silence of things unresolved, but the silence of things that had been said fully enough that there was no longer pressure beneath them. The conversation that followed was not short. It lasted the better part of the morning and moved through the things that needed moving through. The specific terms of the business partnership going forward, which they discussed with the directness of two people who understood that romantic and professional were both real categories and that conflating them sloppily was how both got ruined. The parameters Charlotte wanted, full operational transparency, which Sebastian agreed to without negotiation. Equal structural standing in the decisions that touched both their operations, which Sebastian had already built into his mental model and confirmed without hesitation. The pace of the personal, which they discussed with the same directness and landed at the same place. Real, unhurried, with the understanding that what had been built under pressure deserved to be rebuilt, in the calmer conditions that followed, into something that was chosen freely rather than forged by circumstance. At 12:45, Charlotte's phone buzzed with a call from Dana Fisk. She looked at the screen, then at Sebastian. He made a small, easy gesture. Go ahead. And she answered. The court has processed the settlement in full, Dana said. It's done, Charlotte. Completely done. Roman's attorneys have signed off on every term. The conspiracy allegation is formally withdrawn and expunged from the proceedings. Your business assets, the contact network, the premarital capital, all of it is legally and permanently yours. A brief pause. I've been a family law attorney for 23 years. The documentation package you brought me was the most comprehensively prepared client submission I have ever worked with. I want you to know that. Charlotte looked at the south-facing windows and the winter light coming through them. Thank you, Dana, she said, for everything. Call me if you ever need me again. A pause. Though frankly, given the documentation discipline you demonstrated, I suspect you won't. Charlotte smiled. Good night, Dana. She hung up. Sebastian was watching her. It's done, she said. He nodded once. She sat with that for a moment. The fullness of it, the specific weight of a chapter closing. Not the ending of the pain exactly, because pain didn't work on legal schedules, and she knew there would be days ahead when the loss of those years landed in ways she hadn't anticipated yet. But the closing of the proceeding. The formal, legal, irrevocable establishment of what was hers. Done. 3 weeks after the Meridian Gala, Charlotte received a message through Sebastian's attorney from Sonia Marsh in Seattle. It was short, professional in the way of someone who had learned to be careful. Sonia thanked Charlotte for reaching out, said she had heard that the situation in Chicago had resolved in ways she was glad to know about, and said that she had started a small practice in Seattle. Administrative consulting, nothing connected to what her former life had been, and that she was okay. Charlotte read the message twice. Then she wrote back personally through the same channel that she was glad Sonia was okay, that she hoped the Seattle practice grew into whatever Sonia wanted it to be, and that if she ever found herself back in Chicago for any reason, there was a firm that might have use for her particular experience. She sent it and went back to work. Peter Grange called 3 days later. He had been contacted through Sebastian's attorney and had clearly spent some time deciding whether to respond. His voice on the phone was careful in the way of a man who had learned that unexpected opportunities sometimes had invisible structures underneath them. Charlotte told him straight. She was relaunching Bennett's signature events at a scale that required someone who understood the financial architecture of the kind of clients she worked with. She had looked at his background. She thought he was underemployed. She was not offering charity. She was offering a position that would be demanding and would require him to work at the level he was actually capable of, which was higher than what he'd been doing. There was a pause on his end. Why? He said. Because you were good at what you did, Charlotte said. And someone took that from you in a way that wasn't about your ability. I know what that's like. And I need someone good. Another pause. When would you want me to start? He said. Monday, Charlotte said. If you're in. I'm in, he said. She hired 2 other people that month. A logistics coordinator named Jess, who was 27 and terrifyingly organized and had been running events for a mid-tier firm for 3 years without enough room to operate at her actual level, and a communications manager named Troy, whose specific talent was making wealthy people feel that an event had been designed with them personally in mind, which was an art form that most people in the industry undersold. Bennett's signature events grew into its new configuration with the natural momentum of a thing that had been ready and simply needed space. Charlotte worked hard. She worked in the way she had worked before Roman, before the slow erosion, with the full extension of herself, with pleasure in the craft of it, with the specific satisfaction of a person operating at their actual capacity in a field they were genuinely built for. She ran rooms, she built environments, she turned gatherings into the particular kind of memory that made clients call her back. She and Sebastian had dinner twice a week, which had settled into their rhythm without being formally designated as their rhythm. Sometimes at the West Loop apartment, where Charlotte had learned the geography of his shelves and his silences and the specific way he made coffee at 6 in the morning when she stayed over, which she now did without the careful self-monitoring she had brought to the first weeks. Sometimes at restaurants he chose, quiet places with good food and no performance. Occasionally at events she was running, where he would arrive and move through the room with the unhurried ease of a man who had nowhere more important to be, and the specific pleasure of watching someone he admired do the thing they were built to do. They argued twice in the first month after Meridian. The first argument was about a decision Sebastian made regarding one of his influence network contacts that affected a client relationship Charlotte had been building, without telling her in advance. It was not a large decision in the scale of his operations. It was large in the scale of what they had agreed. She called him on it directly and without softening, and he listened and acknowledged the breach and did not defend it. And they spent 40 minutes working through the specific terms of how decisions that touched shared territory were going to be handled going forward, and at the end of it, the boundary was clearer than it had been before. The second argument was more personal and more difficult, and happened on a Sunday afternoon in her apartment when she told him something she had not told anyone except Victoria, about the specific shape of the damage Roman had left in her, not the professional damage, not the legal damage, but the personal kind, the way that 5 years of being slowly erased had altered her internal architecture in ways she was still mapping. She told him because she needed to, because they were building something real, and real things required the real material, and because the only way she knew to not repeat the patterns of her past was to refuse to hide the parts of herself that those patterns had operated on. Sebastian listened without interrupting. When she finished, he did not offer comfort in the performative way. He did not say the things that were available to say that would have made the moment easier but smaller. He said, "Thank you for telling me." And then, "I need to tell you something too." He told her about the years before Chicago, which he had not told her before, the specific costs of the life he had built, and the people it had cost him, a partnership that had ended badly, a friendship he had damaged through exactly the kind of unilateral decision-making he had done with Charlotte in the early weeks. A period in his late 30s where the isolation of operating carefully and alone had become something he had stopped examining because examining it was uncomfortable. He told her about the 4 years between the Alderton Gala and the night he had seen Roman leave with Evelyn Sinclair. 4 years in which he had thought about reaching out and had not, for reasons that seemed less valid the longer he looked at them.
"Fear," she said when he paused. "Yes," he said. "Fear." They sat with that. Then Charlotte said, "We're both people who got good at operating alone because operating alone was what was available, and now we're trying to do something different." She paused. "That's going to keep being difficult." "I know," he said. "I'm not saying I'm not willing. I know that too."
She looked at him across the kitchen table. Her kitchen, her table, the curtains she had chosen, and the light she had arranged to come in at the right angle in the afternoon, and felt something that was not the warm falling sensation she had once confused with love. It was quieter than that, more structural, the feeling of understanding clearly and without sentimentality that the person across from her was real and imperfect and willing, and that those three things together were rarer than she had once understood them to be.
"Okay," she said. "Okay," he said.
They were not the same people they had been before any of this. That was the part that took the longest to understand. Not the events themselves, not the legal proceedings, or the career reconstruction, or the specific seismic moments, but the quieter truth that ran underneath all of it. The version of Charlotte Bennett, who had pressed a tablecloth and lit candles and stood in front of a mirror, cataloging damage before walking out to receive a dinner guest she had been trying to save a marriage with. That woman was not who was sitting at this kitchen table. She had not been replaced or improved or fixed. She had been altered by pressure and choice, and the specific education of having survived something that changed the shape of your interior geography. She was still herself, but herself differently, more fully, with less of the structure built around managing how she appeared and more of the structure built around knowing what she actually was. The first major event Bennett's signature events ran after Meridian was a private corporate gathering in February, a client referral from the Meridian Foundation, a technology company celebrating a significant acquisition, 200 guests, a 3-day build. Charlotte ran it with her new team, and Jess's organizational precision, and Troy's social intelligence, and Peter Grange's quiet financial fluency operating in the background of client relationships all functioned together with the specific harmony of a system built correctly from the start. At the end of the third day, when the last guest had left, and the venue breakdown crew was working, and Charlotte was doing the final walkthrough with her checklist, Jess came and stood beside her at the edge of the empty room. "That was flawless," Jess said. "Almost," Charlotte said. "The transition between the keynote and the dinner service ran 90 seconds long." 90 seconds. "I know where 90 seconds goes," Charlotte said. "Fix it in the debrief." Jess smiled. "Yes, boss." Charlotte walked the room. It was the professional habit of a person who never completely turned off. The instinct to look at the space after the event and see both what it had been and what it would need to be next time. She walked the perimeter, made notes, paused at the east wall where the lighting had done something she hadn't fully anticipated, and had been, in the end, better than what she planned. which was the kind of accident that happened when you built something carefully enough that even the unexpected parts were correct. She stood in the empty room for a moment. She thought about the penthouse on the 43rd floor with the city below it, and the candles going out one by one, and the dish towel over her forearm. She thought about sitting on that couch in the dark, looking at the city that believed it belonged to Roman DeLuca. She thought about the text message, 6 words, from a number she didn't recognize, and the woman who had sat with that message for hours before she responded. That woman had known, even in the worst of it, that she was still capable of something, had kept the documentation, had refused to let herself be written out of the record of her own work, had walked into a lawyer's office with 4 years of evidence and said, "This is mine and I can prove it." That had been the seed. Everything else had grown from it. She turned off the lights in the empty room and went out into the February night where Sebastian was waiting by the car, his breath visible in the cold air, looking at his phone. He looked up when she came through the door. "Good?" he said. 90 seconds long on the keynote to dinner transition, she said. "Otherwise, yes." He fell into step beside her. They walked to the car in the cold, their shoulders close without quite touching, the city doing what Chicago did in February, blunt and cold and alive with the specific stubborn vitality of a place that had decided long ago that weather was not a reason to stop. In the car, before Sebastian started the engine, he looked at her. "There's something I want to ask you," he said. The quality of his voice, careful, present, stripped of the operational layer, made her turn and look at him. "I want to do this properly," he said. "What we are. I want it to have the right name." Charlotte looked at him in the low light of the car, the city outside, February and cold and indifferent. "Are you asking me something?" she said. "I'm asking if you want what I want." He held her gaze. "Not because the timing is convenient, not because of what we've been through, because of who you are. Because every single room you've walked into since the night I saw you at the Alderton Gala, you have been the most awake person in it. Because you kept records for 4 years on a hard drive, because you always knew your own value, even when someone was working full-time to obscure it from you." A pause. "Because you hire the people Roman discarded and build them back into what they actually are. Because you argue with me when I get it wrong and you're right every time and you know it and you don't hold it over me." He stopped. Charlotte waited. "Because I was afraid for 4 years, he said, "and I'm not willing to be afraid anymore." The car was very quiet. Outside, a cab moved through the intersection, yellow in the dark. Charlotte looked at Sebastian Kane. This man who was not simple and not uncomplicated, and not without cost she was still measuring. This man who had held her number for 4 years and called it the night she needed someone to call. And she ran the antenna one final time. It told her what it had always told her. "Yes," she said. "I want what you want." He held her gaze for a moment. Then he started the car. They drove through February Chicago in the specific silence of two people who have said a large thing and are living in the space it opened, and the city moved outside the windows. The bridges over the river lit from below. The buildings, the particular quality of the light at this hour in this season, cold and clear and without illusion. 6 months after the Meridian Gala, Roman DeLuca settled the last of the federal inquiries that had followed the court records exposure with a consent agreement that required significant structural changes to his remaining operations, and the quiet departure of 3 associates whose names had been in Charlotte's documentation. His empire did not collapse. He was not a man built to collapse quietly, but it contracted into something considerably smaller and more supervised than it had been. And the city's underground circuits adjusted to the new configuration with the pragmatic flexibility of systems that had always valued function over loyalty. Charlotte read the news summary in the morning and turned the page. The rooftop dinner happened in late spring. Sebastian had arranged it without telling her what he was arranging, had said only that he had dinner plans for Saturday evening and that she should dress for outdoors. She had shown up to a private rooftop she had never been to, somewhere in the West Loop, with a table set for 2, and the city spread in every direction, and the sky doing what Chicago skies do in May, huge and lavender, and operating at a scale that made everything below it feel simultaneously small and precisely the right size. The table had smoky rice and garlic butter steak and whiskey. She had stopped walking when she saw it. She looked at the food, and she looked at Sebastian standing beside the table, and she understood immediately what he had done. had reconstructed, deliberately and with care, the meal she had cooked on the night that everything ended and no one had eaten. The meal that had gone into the trash in foil while she extinguished candles and counted what she had left. He was returning it to her. Not the same night, a different night, a better one. She stood at the edge of the rooftop in the May evening with the city below her and felt something move through her chest that was not grief and not joy exactly, but some third thing that lived in the territory between them, where the real and permanent emotions resided, the ones that didn't require a name to be understood. She walked to the table. Sebastian waited until she sat before sitting himself. He poured the whiskey. She looked at the food and the city and the spring sky and the man across from her, and she thought about the woman who had stood in front of a mirror cataloging damage before putting on a crimson dress and waiting for someone who was never going to show up the way she needed him to. She thought about that woman with the specific tenderness that distance allows, not with pity, not with the cringing retrospective shame of someone who couldn't bear to look at their own past, but with the clear-eyed recognition of someone who understood, finally, that the woman in the mirror had always been worth more than the room she was standing in. She had known it. Even then. Even at the worst of it, she had kept the records. "You didn't have to do this," she said, not as a complaint, as a recognition. "I know," Sebastian said. "I wanted to." She looked at him. "When you kept my number," she said. 4 years. "What did you think was going to happen?" He considered this honestly. "I didn't know. I knew you were in a life that wasn't right for you. I knew I wasn't in a position to say so." A pause. "I think I thought, if she ever gets out of that room, she's going to need someone who already knows what she's capable of, who doesn't need to be convinced." Charlotte held his gaze. "And if I'd never gotten out, then the number would have stayed in the drawer," he said, "and I would have been wrong to keep it. Those are the terms of that kind of thing. You can't know in advance." She picked up her glass of whiskey. He picked up his. "To getting out of the room," she said. Something in his face, warm and real and without performance. "To getting out of the room," he said. They drank. Below them the city spread its lights into the dark, indifferent, alive, full of rooms where people were in the middle of their own versions of everything she had survived, full of women pressing tablecloths and keeping records and standing in front of mirrors cataloging damage and waiting for someone to understand what they were worth. Some of them would get out. Some of them would keep the records and use them. Some of them, eventually, would sit on a rooftop with the right person and let themselves believe, finally and without condition, that being chosen did not require being made smaller first. Charlotte Bennett ate the food that had been returned to her and drank the whiskey and talked to a man who listened when she spoke and disagreed with her when she was wrong and held her gaze across the table without needing anything from her except exactly what she was. The city glittered below. The spring night was cold and clean and enormous, and she was in it, fully and completely, without apology and without diminishment, exactly the size of herself. That was the whole of it. That was enough.